be joined by Congressman Peter King, the Republican from New York State, who is a member of the House Committee on Homeland Security. Pete, we welcome you back to America's Forum.
JD, always great being with you.
It is good to have you along this morning, Pete. What is the latest you are hearing from Iraq this morning?
I think we are closer to seeing Maliki being replaced and al-Abadi becoming the prime minister. Nothing is easy in Iraq, but Maliki's days have to be numbered. The Iraqi people, certainly the people in the Iraqi parliament, have to realize that they are faced with an existential threat from ISIS, and if they're going to get the support they need from the United States and other countries, that Maliki has to go, that he's just lost the confidence of the allies. Now, that's no excuse for President Obama not doing more, or for having laid back for so long. But having said that, the reality is that Maliki, who I always felt was just basically not a stooge, but certainly a front man for the Iranians during the whole Saddam Hussein regime. He stayed in Iran. He's a Shiite who's close to the Iranian extremists. While al-Abadi, I mean, we don't know a lot about him, but during his exile from Iraq, he was in England. He studied in England, so he's much more Western-oriented. I think he's much more of a pragmatist, and from all accounts, a person we can deal with much better than al-Maliki.
So you believe, at least in terms of political intrigue, the president coming out yesterday, we will see that change in the Iraqi government, and is it safe to call it essentially a fait accompli, Pete?
No, I wouldn't go that far.
Okay.
In Iraq, you never know. I mean, Maliki still does have control of the military. I don't think he would try to pull a coup, and I don't know if the military would go along with him, but he does have control over, certainly significant parts of the military, and they would have to decide whether or not they want to basically shred their constitution and go with a leader who has lost the support, not just of people in Iraq, but of his neighbors and the countries that they have to be allied with to have any expectation of succeeding.
Let's talk about what is happening militarily. A top Defense Department official in our country yesterday said he did not believe airstrikes will be enough to stop ISIS. Do you share that assessment?
Yes, certainly the way we're doing them. And we're targeting ISIS in a very small area of Kurdistan. And ISIS now controls a landmass larger than the state of Georgia, larger than the country of Jordan, larger than Great Britain. I mean, this is in effect, the first terrorist country that's been established. And so us attacking, and it is effective in that we are going to probably be able to end that siege or that blockade of the people that are on the mountain. But that's a tiny fraction of the area we're talking about. And meanwhile, ISIS continues to move forward. So no, if we're going to be successful, we have to even have a chance of being successful. Massive air attacks all over wherever ISIS is, wherever we can hit them, do that. We should start working with the Iraqi army now. And one of the reasons the Iraqi army failed, and there's no excuse for it, but one of the reasons they failed was that Maliki had put his cronies in his commanding officers in many of these units, and these were Sunni units, so they didn't want to fight, and they took off. And also, the U.S., when President Obama pulled out all our troops, we had nobody embedded with the Iraqi army, so we did not know how weak it was going to be. So we have to work with the Iraqi army. We have to have our troops, I believe, embedded with them to provide direction to them. And also we have to start arming the Kurds, arming them more than we have. And if we can even go back to what we did, what General Petraeus did back in Anbar province, where he was able, back in 2007 during the surge, to turn the Sunnis against al-Qaeda. Now, the Obama administration let that be all undone. But perhaps we have to find a way to make that work, get some of the Arab neighbors involved. I think the bombing, if we keep carrying it from aircraft carriers, carrying out the bombing raids, it's going to be less effective than if we use bases in local countries, adjoining countries, so we can have more of a saturation bombing.
Well, as you mentioned this, Pete, we were taking a look at our parent website, Newsmax.com, with a headline about 100 missions being flown over Iraq. You have offered some historical reference points, and as you were mentioning the surge and some other things, I thought back to the early days in Iraq where we talked about American air power and shock and awe. Does there need to be, even with a lack of ground assets in Iraq, could our Air Force unleash what we could call a shock and awe sequel in that area against ISIS to effectively cut off the continued persecution of the Christians and other sects there in northern Iraq?
JD, yes, as far as northern Iraq, I think we could definitely make a real difference there. As far as the rest of Iraq, would have to be real saturation bombing, but even in the north, no, we could definitely have an impact in the north, and and the Kurdish fighters are better than they're given credit for. I think if we give them enough weaponry, if we can have sustained bombing in the north to blunt the ISIS offensive, to cut off their supplies, and at the same time be arming the Kurds, then I think the Kurds will be able to push back at ISIS. And I am reasonably confident that we can secure the northern part of Kurdistan, so at least stop the ISIS offensive. To roll ISIS back from other areas, or like Mosul or Fallujah, Anbar province, all those is going to be much, much more difficult.
Well, more recent history. This past weekend, you appeared on Meet the Press on NBC. Senator Dick Durbin of Illinois, your opposite number, the senator said we should basically let Iraq solve Iraq's problems. Let's listen in. Our viewers will get a chance to hear what he had to say, and then we're going to get your response from today's vantage point.
Because only Iraq can save Iraq. The president has stepped in because of this threatened genocide. I support that. Bringing food and water to these people who are dying on that mountaintop, of course the United States should do that. And when it comes to the Kurds, yes, they have been the adults in this neighborhood, the grown-ups. And I think that we ought to help them preserve their capital against this ISIS invasion. And we also want to make certain that the Americans that are on the ground are protected. The bottom line is this: there is so much that we can do to help the Iraqis help themselves, but ultimately they have to save their own country.
Now, Pete, you gave a strong response on Meet the Press, but from today's vantage point, what would you be saying to Dick Durbin this morning?
Dick Durbin is missing the whole picture. What he's talking about is maybe 1% of the landmass that ISIS controls. And when he says it's up to the Iraqi people, I'm not concerned about Iraq per se. I'm concerned about the United States of America. If ISIS is able to maintain that landmass that they have as a privileged sanctuary, it's going to undermine the Middle East, and they will have hundreds of fighters available to come to the United States, and we know that that's their goal. So it's not that we're worried about Iraq per se. It's about what the consequences are for the U.S. And to somehow say it's up to Iraq, and if Iraq doesn't do it, we're not going to do anything. Well, what's he going to say then when attacks are launched from that area and Americans are killed?
Fair enough. We will have to leave it.
It's the other guy's responsibility, not mine, so I'm washing my hands of it.
We'll have to leave it right there, Pete King. We thank you for your insights. We'll visit again soon. Coming up next, you saw the video yesterday, James O'Keefe illegally entering the U.S. disguised as Osama bin Laden. Mr. O'Keefe joins us next, along with a former border patrolman.